remember my dad going down there, and I can remember my mom saying, "Please be careful, the whole damn elevator's on fire," you know. And I guess that's about one of my earliest memories.
I think his grandparents were German immigrants, as with the big wave of German settlers that came through the Ohio Valley, and they landed in Quincy.
Tom Oakley, one of the most prominent citizens of Quincy, a fourth-generation owner of the newspaper, the Herald Whig, knew Elmer very well and fondly reflected on Elmer's past.
He was a part of a old German Quincy family that was certainly well known in its own right. But Elmer Wavering, as a very young man, developed a fascination for radio at a point in time when radio was something. It was just almost a vision that nobody had.
But Elmer had that vision. Lynn Shotwell says Elmer got into scouting as a child and later became an Eagle Scout, testament to his determination to excel in any field where he focused his abilities. And being the only child around the house during those days, Elmer spent time finding creative ways to occupy his time.
He played along the bluffs of the Mississippi, in the caves, and he was just an outdoor kind of person. I think that by the time he was born, I think that there was little parental supervision. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I just think that, people were doing other things, and he was just sort of growing up on his own.
Elmer would later tell friends about those times during his youth when he and friends would play along the Mississippi, even swimming in the fast-moving river. But the mighty Mississippi is a dangerous place to enter. And while there are places, pristine locations, where the water calmly meets the shore, the beckoning river is deceptively dangerous. The muddy waters are full of tricky, swirling eddies, places that can hold, trap, and swallow an unsuspecting swimmer who would never be seen again. Those risky days had a strong impact on Elmer, and he never forgot them. Later in life, he would attempt to protect future generations of rambunctious children from having to play in such a perilous location. But while Elmer was growing up, it was a time of unending curiosity. He was beginning to make things and tinker with all kinds of stuff, especially radios.
What eventually, in our house, one of the upstairs bedrooms was known as the radio room, because that's where he had all of his... I can remember the soldering bench and all of these soldering irons and all of these pieces of things that he would put together. And eventually, when he left home, well, it became my bedroom. But at that time, it was known as the radio room.
Annabelle says she never knew a lot about Elmer's childhood. He was already 12 by the time she was born, and Elmer himself said little about the type of family unit he came from.
He never spoke a lot about his parents while I was growing up. He talked about his boyhood experiences, all with great love and emotion and whatever. He loved all that, but he didn't talk about a family life.
By now, Elmer had been bitten by the radio bug, something that was all the rage during his childhood. This new technology was sweeping the country. Tinkerers like Elmer were trying their hands at building radios, but amateur and commercial use of radio came to an abrupt halt on April 7, 1917, when the United States entered into the 3-year-old World War I. Most private U.S. radio stations were ordered by the President to either shut down or be taken over by the government. And for the duration of the war, about one more year, it became illegal for private U.S. citizens to even possess an operational radio transmitter or receiver. Radio in the U.S. had become a government monopoly, reserved for the war effort. Amateur radio operators were particularly hard hit by the restrictions, but before long the war was over. Tinkerers were once again free to dabble in the fledgling field of radio. Almost overnight, major corporations began to develop. American Telephone and Telegraph Company, General Electric, and Westinghouse all moved into the field. Meanwhile, in 1919, due to pressure from the U.S. government, American Marconi Company's assets were sold to General Electric, which used them to form the Radio Corporation of America. Although RCA was initially envisioned as an international communications company, it also moved quickly into the developing broadcasting field. RCA made its broadcast debut on July 2, 1921, with a heavyweight boxing championship, as Jack Dempsey defeated George Carpentier. The bout took place in Hoboken, New Jersey, and was broadcast by a temporary long-wave station, WJY, with a transcript of the fight commentary telegraphed to KDKA in Pittsburgh for rebroadcast by that station.
This is KDKA of the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company in East Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Because of the lack of radio receivers, a majority of the listeners were in halls, where volunteer amateurs set up radio receivers, charging admission for the sponsoring charities. By now, Elmer was 14 years old. With his family now living in different parts of the country, Elmer went to visit his sister Florence in Denver. Her husband, Frank, worked for the Veterans Administration. In the basement of the VA, Elmer spent time with a group of veterans who had formed a radio club. This further solidified his interests in radio and all things electric.
These fellows had some experience with radio. However, it had to be fairly early radio, and taught Elmer, apparently as just this young boy, how to solder and how to actually put together these pieces into what could be considered a radio.
I sensed that there wasn't a great family unit at that time, that the family had sort of dispersed. His older sisters had gone other ways. But his older sisters took care of him along the way. He went to live with them in Washington and Denver, and so there was that connection. But he sort of did it by himself.
While living with his sister in Washington, D.C., Elmer studied at George Washington University. While there to help pay for school, he worked for a security company that guarded the home of Evelyn Walsh McLean. At the time, the wealthy heiress owned the famous 44.5-carat Hope Diamond.
And the Hope Diamond was in a safe in her house, and so my father's job was to go over there and check that. And he was called to check it a lot. She had a little drinking problem, and she would just say, "Oh, Elmer is such a nice boy. I just think maybe my battery is not working properly right."
Well, the batteries were in a secret door behind her bed.
In her bedroom, and she would be in a negligee when he came in, and he said, and she would make me play cards, and my father just was not a card player or a negligee.
Or a womanizer.
So but he loved the story, and it's quite a cute story. So that was, I think, before the diamond went to the Smithsonian.
Elmer soon left George Washington University after about a semester, feeling that electronics were passing him by while he studied in school. Being an academic was not in the stars for Elmer.
Thomas Alva Edison didn't have much formal education either, and look what he did. So quality will out in anything, and that's not to demean the value of an education. It's a big help, but it's not always an absolute necessity.
Now, he was doing fine in all of the audio stuff, but couldn't handle any foreign language. I mean, don't ask him to pass French or Spanish or Italian or anything else. And I'm not sure about English, but I guess he did do that all right.
Destiny was calling Elmer back to Quincy, Illinois. His place in the history books was about to be written.